So whether you're DRA Advisors or one of my former companies, which is now Nuveen,
Mhm.
your investors that are actually giving money care about these issues.
Yeah.
The role of an asset manager is really about creating and applying financial strategy,
Mhm.
to drive towards an underwritten return.
People ask me all the time, why is getting a job harder than my actual job? Then I tell them, imagine being a recruiter. I wasn't always in executive search. I was an engineer, a broker, and then cold called my way to being an investor. And as I networked with my peers in the industry, I found their stories to be fascinating. It's the people that make the industry special to me, and that's where I put my focus, the talent and the stories behind them. It's an honor to work with the elite executives, and I wanted to create a platform to put their stories on display for the world. Welcome to the Investment Committee.
Today, we are honored to welcome Terry Glanville. She is the asset manager at DRA Advisors, a real estate investment firm with $12.2 billion in AUM. Terry has managed an equity value of $5.4 billion across office, industrial, retail, hotel, and multifamily assets spanning the globe. A Columbia University graduate, Terry brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from her diverse corporate background with institutional investors, through banking and family offices. Terry, welcome to the Investment.
Thank you for having me. Honored to be here.
And thank you for coming on the show. So Terry, tell us about the beginning, about yourself, and how you ended up in commercial real estate.
Sure. When I came out of undergraduate, I actually ended up working for a very specialized subset of real estate development consulting.
Mhm.
I was doing sports and university venue planning,
Interesting.
very, very specialized facility planning. And so my specialty was specifically in facilities for student unions as well as student housing,
Okay.
ballparks, basketball arenas, football stadiums. And after 5 years of doing that, I realized that there's only so many facilities that you can plan and do.
Right. It's
It was
extremely
an
rare
it
background.
is,
Yeah.
it is. It was an
Rarely ever.
amazing background.
Right.
And I decided at that point I wanted to consider pursuing my MBA. I ended up at a conference with someone who would eventually become my professor and who heard about my background and said, you know what, we would love for you to look at a program like the Masters of Real Estate.
Okay.
I looked at it and I fell in love. I knew that real estate was where I wanted to be. And so that is what brought me to Columbia University and the beginning of my career within commercial real estate. So.
Great. Great. That's a very interesting background from the dealing with those
Mhm.
specialty assets. Was it that you found, okay, let me see what I could do in the real estate space? Like how did the, I guess, the love for real estate come about where
Sure.
you fell in love with the program? Or was it through the program? Was it through that background? How did that happen?
So it was a combination of both. I traveled all around the country, even left internationally to do some work in Great Britain.
Wow.
One thing that you see is real estate is the only tangible asset class that you
Mhm.
can actually touch and feel.
Yeah.
It's what infrastructurally shapes society, community, demographics across the board.
Mhm.
And I just fell in love with it. I love the idea of being able to actually shape community by touching what you live in, what you breathe, what you actually work and play in. And so, once I decided to go to the program and just really see the impact that real estate could have, just not only in terms of investments, but just
Mhm.
in terms of community development, I just knew that that's where I wanted to be. Universities is a very special place just because it's so insular. You've got a
Right.
captured market, and you can really see how these facilities and just real estate in general
Yeah.
plays into your overall sense of development and your well-being. So I've always loved real estate,
Mhm.
and I'm going to continue to love real estate. I have no desire to be in any other profession.
Okay. Great. Where when you were a student
Yes.
coming up through the industry,
Mhm.
what was it like getting career advice, figuring out what roles you wanted to play in real estate,
Mhm.
finance, investments, corporate real estate, asset
Mhm.
management? Where was what was guidance like back
Mhm.
then coming up? There was less information,
Mhm.
information wasn't widely available. People didn't even know, you
Right.
heard real estate back then, you just
Right.
thought, office leasing or,
Right.
apartments. What
Right.
was it like back then, sort of coming up young through the industry at that
Sure.
time?
I think it's definitely evolved. I think real estate at the time when I was first starting in my career was always considered like an alternative asset class.
Mhm.
I think the popularity of graduate school and even undergraduate school programs has evolved over the last 20 to 25 years. For me, I leaned very heavily on unofficial mentors,
Mhm.
people that I still speak to this day, people that have said, you know what, this is where I think you would be good. I figured out very early on whether I wanted to be a deal person, whether I
Mhm.
wanted to be a person that lived with an asset.
Mhm.
I decided that I am not a person that was transaction oriented. I didn't
Okay.
want to do acquisitions. I didn't want to just, come up with the returns and the financial profile of an asset and then just move on. I wanted to actually live with that asset.
Mhm.
And that just comes through self discovery, just, real time experience. I did acquisitions for a very short amount of time, and I just decided that just wasn't a role for me, like I said.
Mhm.
But mentorship, just real life experience, exposure, academic, and both academic and real life exposure is what brought me to where I am, which is asset management. My career over time has always been in asset management to some extent. I've
Mhm.
dabbled in other areas that for about 5 years of my career, I was an originator.
Okay.
Once again, I came back to asset management. And
Yeah.
so I think, once again, just going into real life experience and talking to the right people and having different scenarios in which you decide where you're best comfortable, that is how you decide where you best belong.
That's beautiful to
Mhm.
hear. And how has, on the topic of asset management, as where you decide to specialize,
Mhm.
how has the profession changed throughout the years from when you started
Mhm.
to what it is now?
Sure. It's a great question. I think when I first started, at least the general perception was that asset managers were a little bit of paper pushers,
Mhm.
cost centers,
Mhm.
and nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
As real estate has evolved, it's become extremely multifaceted. The role of an asset manager is really about creating and applying financial strategy,
Mhm.
to drive towards an underwritten return.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, who don't understand real estate look at asset managers and see a lot of overlap, maybe with property management function,
Mhm.
or just what they perceive to be the day to day operations. And there is some overlap.
Mhm.
Obviously, the people that I work with are property managers, and I want to make sure that the daily health of my properties and assets are actually performing. But what I'm ultimately tasked with is making sure that these properties are moving towards, or at least, I'm sorry, maximizing their profitability for my investor. Within that, I have to make sure that budgets are created and executed, capex plans are delivered upon, and just the overall operational health of that asset continues to perform. Particularly as real estate has evolved and economies and cycles have gotten more complicated, whether that's for the better or for the worse.
Mhm.
Just overall, there's a greater emphasis on NOI as a part of an underwritten return for an
Right.
asset.
Right.
So I ultimately view my job as making sure that I can maximize NOI and eventually, or ultimately rather, maximize just the profitability of that asset. Whereas once again, I'm no longer just a person checking a box or someone that's making sure that a budget's in place. I consider myself an underwriter. I consider myself a leasing person. I consider myself legal counsel, a marketer, construction.
Right.
I oversee architects and just spec suite development. I consider myself a debt restructurer. I'm very
Right.
heavily involved in
Especially
debt.
nowadays, I could
Absolutely,
only imagine that's been a
absolutely.
big focus on
Absolutely.
top.
So
Right.
I wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. And the
Um,
origination piece probably helps with that as well,
absolutely.
being on the debt side.
Absolutely.
That's
Yes.
probably a very valuable skill set in
It
today's
is.
market.
It
Yeah.
is. And even, when I originated debt almost 10 years ago, it's a very different landscape than it
Okay.
was back then.
How so?
Um, I mean, first of all, when I originated, LIBOR still existed, but that's a different
That's a different
story.
topic. Right. Right. Right.
But it's just a different playing field.
Mhm.
I worked for a balance sheet lender,
Mhm.
and obviously different lenders have different criteria.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we are dealing with high interest rates, very unique, just debt capital market structures and environments that are really truly driving how we look at real estate and how we look at our returns.
Yeah.
We have to be creative. Gone, I think, are the day are where lenders can just turn around and say, okay, you aren't doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're not meeting covenants. And so, therefore you're going to a workout group. Uh, Lenders don't want to necessarily take back assets, and
Right.
owners aren't necessarily looking to give them back.
Right.
And so we all have to work together.
Yeah.
Basically.
I can imagine this time I mean, asset managers have the spotlight today.
Yes. Yes.
The recruiting conversations that I have is for really skilled, seasoned asset managers. And tell me, more and more executives today I've seen are becoming entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
COVID really let people take a step back and have more soul searching into what they want to do. We've been seeing more partners, more managing directors leave their seat to start their own funds,
Mhm.
and they're looking for skilled, seasoned asset managers. However, they're going to start off being an operating partner.
Mhm.
A lot of the executives might have worked in large institutions. Now they're going to be an operating partner. When institutions are evaluating an operating partner to do a JV with,
Mhm.
what are they looking for? What is involved in that partnership, particularly
Sure.
from an asset management point of view, because you've had the pleasure of sitting on both sides of the table. So
Mhm.
what does that look like?
Sure. So first and foremost, there needs to be an alignment in terms of the financials, right? You have to make sure that your metrics, your KPIs, your returns are all on the same page. Promotes the returns, everything that you're looking for, you need to be aligned in terms of just being an operating partner and a sponsor, general partner, or limited partner.
Mhm.
You'll have to be on the same page with that.
Right.
That's first and foremost. The second thing is within the given context of a JV agreement, you have to make sure that there's a clear outline of whose tasks and responsibilities exists. So as the operating partner, are you responsible for certain types of reporting? Does the majority partner or the sponsor have certain requirements that you can or cannot meet?
Mhm.
And that's very important. Every institution that I've had has different and very unique requirements
Okay.
specific to that institution. And we've had partners that haven't been able to rise to the challenge, and
Right.
those JVAs have had to be revisited. Um, you know, from an asset management point of view, to me, beyond just those two obvious points, being local boots on the ground and your ability to add value from a local or regional perspective is key for me.
Right.
I cover many different markets.
Okay.
My operating partners are local. They understand the market much better than I do.
Mhm.
They can get into specifics, whether it's regarding construction or just legislation or whatever issue arises that's specific to that particular region, and they can deal with it accordingly. And
Yeah.
I depend very heavily on that. Boots on the ground, all translates to, at the end of the day, just maximizing your NOI for this specific asset.
Mhm.
More importantly, particularly in the world of private equity,
Mhm.
having an operating partner that gives you all of those synergies. You're also looking for someone that can help you, frankly, find more deals.
Right.
You're looking for off-market transactions.
Right, because they're right on the ground to recognize
They're all right
everything. They
there.
have all the contacts and
Precisely.
connections, so
Precisely.
that's part of the value.
Precisely.
Adding value where it might not necessarily been part of the agreement, but we want to add, have a partnership together.
Absolutely.
What are some of the strategies that whether it's yourself or your colleagues are thinking about putting in place with over time?
Mhm.
Because what worked yesterday isn't going to work tomorrow.
Mhm.
Like you said, interest rates are higher. There's more institutional capital in place. It's a more competitive market.
Mhm.
How do you differentiate yourself as an organization looking to add value? Because now that's where the returns are going to come from.
Mhm.
It's not the same, making money off of financial engineering isn't going to be the same. Just making money on the buy isn't going to be the same.
Mhm.
There's more distress. What are you thinking about
Mhm.
as you move forward? Because now, for the next 5, 6, 7 years, asset managers are just going to be on the spotlight. What are you telling your teams? How are you guiding? How are you leading? What is that conversation like?
So, excuse me, everything is a unique situation. For me, when it comes to assets where there is like a redevelopment or repositioning play,
Mm.
I'm constantly looking at value engineering options, right?
Mhm.
Does the concept as originally envisioned continue to make sense?
Mm.
Specifically, I've worked on a redevelopment where there was this amazing redevelopment play that was put into place, but once the market happened, you really have to sit down and assess, like, does this ultimately affect your ability to capture a certain leasing rate or to maintain the integrity of your revenue at the current state that it's at?
Right.
And, like, does value engineering something out ultimately mean that you are compromising your NOI at the end of the day? And that's for a redevelopment play. I think overall, for if it's like a leasing play, you're consistently and constantly looking at what just cost cutting measures operationally, what you can push forward with. Like I'm constantly in tune as an owner's rep because I know what's important to my company. So,
Mhm.
for instance, instead of necessarily giving up more TI dollars in a given situation, which ultimately means that that's additional dollars out of my pocket
Yeah.
as an owner. Am I willing to trade that for concessions? And yes, I will.
Right.
You're constantly assessing the market and assessing your existing operations to figure out how you can trim and keep expenses low. You're also keeping in contact with your team internally to figure out, listen, like what access do you have by way of fund dollars, reserves, like lender dollars. You're constantly in a state of evaluation. And so I think ultimately, it goes back to the same theme I keep talking about, but just revenue preservation,
Yeah.
and just ultimately, managing towards NOI maximization, whether that's through cost cutting, operational efficiencies, or just leasing and redevelopment plays that you're consistently reassessing. So,
That's why she's in the seat and I'm not in the seat. And that's why I have the opportunity to interview her because, wow, that is certainly a lot. Switching gears here, it's an ever evolving profession. As you've gone through your career, what
mhm,
do you read? What do you study? Maybe how do you improve
mhm,
as a profession? And then you also mentioned mentors,
mhm.
the mentors that you had along the way. What guidance have they given you and give you to
Mhm.
this day to improve? What does that look like?
Great question. I think we are in such a dynamic industry that's really evolved over time. I'm a huge believer in just continuing education,
Mm.
whether it's through, there's so many platforms out there, of which I'm sure many of us know about. I'm not endorsing or speaking specifically to any one of those, but whether it's through a certification, through ongoing education, an academic course, a conference,
Mhm.
there's so much material in an online course. There's so much material out there, and I think
Mm.
it's really important to keep current. One of the emerging trends that I think is here to stay that I've seen throughout my career that didn't exist 20 years ago is ESG and sustainability.
Mhm.
It is a huge deal to everyone. It's a massive deal in New York City. You've got Local Law
Right.
11, you've got all of these initiatives. And for me to continuously be on top of my game as an asset manager, I have to stay abreast of those trends,
Right.
firstly and foremost. Secondly, and we've talked about this, is networking, networking, networking. That is super important. Real estate is not a desk job.
Yes.
It is traditionally you get up, you get out, you knock on doors, you talk to people. It is a people's business. You need to continue to talk to people.
Right.
And that's whether it's through great organizations, leadership programs, just local organizations. In my opinion, New York City is one of the best places to do real estate in
Proximity.
general.
No
Exactly.
place like it.
Exactly. You've
It
got
best of the
amazing
best.
talent and
Yes.
amazing people and amazing resources. In terms of mentorships, seek out formal mentorships, and
Mhm.
that's at any and every age. I've always said my best mentors are people I never expected to bond with.
Really.
And they've been people I've worked with, people that of all certain ages. Don't limit yourself just because you're a person of color or a woman or a white male. Seek out everyone.
Mhm.
And the people that I have enduring mentoree relationships with are people that I was not expecting to have those relationships with. Um, Always tap into resources that you think are the resources that you least expect to be there for you.
Mhm.
My grad school, I just had my 20th grad school reunion.
Oh, wow.
I saw some of my favorite people.
Mhm.
We stayed up all night speaking, and these are people that are doing incredible things. I realize over the years that it is talking to these individuals, particularly people that I consider to be my friends,
Mhm.
who've given me some of the best advice
Right.
and just direction in this industry. And so you have to stay active is the overall mantra.
Yeah. Tell us, I guess I'll put you on the spot here a little bit. Tell us one of those stories about how, an accidental mentor or mentee. Because I tell people all
Mhm.
the time, you never know where it's going to come from sometimes,
Right.
right? Like you might have the best intentions to reach out to somebody and then they just never respond to you. You'd love to have them mentor. It doesn't happen, but someone else along the road
Right.
that comes and just helps you out. How did that, if you could give us a tidbit on how an accidental mentee or mentor came to your life.
So I'll give you two.
Okay.
One, in my former role as an originator, I originally started in that role in an asset management position. I did that for 2 years before I moved into the originations role. I just happened to eat lunch with every day as a part of a larger group.
Hmm.
There was
Never
a
eat alone.
never eat alone. I
There it
agree with
is.
that.
Yeah.
There you go. One of the senior people in that group was an underwriter at the time, and we just bonded. We would talk about silly stuff. Just as a side note, always have hobbies, always have things to talk about.
Hmm.
Because I was in sports planning, I always talk about sports. It's a
Which
huge,
sports?
well, football,
There we go.
basketball,
There we go.
and soccer is also a great uniform. Golf is now a huge thing. I'm still
Right.
trying to get into that, but that's a separate story.
Well, now it's
Um,
pickleball.
there you go.
Pickleball might be replacing
There
golf.
you go.
That came
There
out
you
of the
go.
journal a
I
couple
like
days
that.
ago. Yeah.
All right.
So
It's definitely picked up in terms of,
yeah, I still
just
haven't played, but I have to get around to it.
I've definitely played and I'm
Yeah.
not good at it, so I'm gonna have to keep practicing.
Okay.
Yes, one of those senior guys was we would talk every day. He eventually ended up moving over to the origination side, and because of our relationship, when an opportunity came up, he actually approached me and said, "Would you ever consider doing this considering your background?"
Hmm.
I said, "Why not?"
Right.
And I followed him. We're still very close friends to this day. I think very highly of him. He's the person that became, first of all, before I continue the story, the
Yeah.
one thing I do have to say, always be your own biggest advocate,
Yeah.
but make sure that the person that you have created a mentor-mentee relationship is also your biggest advocate.
Yeah.
I was his, he was mine, and that
Right.
alignment
Mhm.
was crucial in terms of my success ultimately, and just
Right.
my knowledge level, my ability to be vulnerable and to say, you know what, I don't know everything, I need your help, was critical
Right.
in that relationship. And I credit him highly in terms of my own development
Right.
in how I view real estate and how to think and how to act.
Right.
So,
Right. Having a
um,
genuine sponsor.
exactly.
Right.
Yes, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other example I'm going to use, they're both friends of mine. We both went to graduate school together. All three of us took very different paths. One is, in my opinion, a very successful entrepreneur. She's bought properties throughout the Northeast. The other one went more of a social, in my opinion, social responsible method, and started building charter schools, and has done amazing things on that front, and eventually went on to start her own company. Well, these are people I speak to all the time, and when I need guidance or mentorship, and or just the ability to get some clarity, it's amazing how someone that you consider a close friend, and someone that you've intertwined your personal life with, can give you true perspective. And so, once again, it's all about the ability to know that you don't know everything, to
Yeah.
seek counsel when you need it, to
Hmm.
be vulnerable and understand that you always bring something to the table as well as the other person, but ultimately be your own biggest advocate.
Right. No, that's
Mhm.
you heard it from the lady herself. No, that's great stories. And you know what I like about that, because I was speaking to some students at NYU and I was telling them, like, when you go on an internship,
Right.
right? The best thing you could do is to grab someone for lunch
Mhm.
and to have lunch with as many people as you
Right.
can.
Mhm.
It's also, the work from home argument as well. Like, if
Right.
you're young in your career, I believe you should try to get in the office, because that's where you build those relationships
Right.
to grow and succeed in your career.
Right.
So, hearing that you have a mentor just because you guys were chopping it up and talking
Mhm.
about sports, and it turned into something that was lifelong, it's worth it.
Absolutely.
It's 100% worth it.
Talk to everyone.
Talk to everyone. You just
Talk to
never know.
everyone.
As you as you've grown in your career and you've led asset management teams,
Mhm.
what have you learned about yourself as a leader?
Mhm.
In what have you learned in leadership, probably from leading and from your mentors, and what was that transition like for you, going from probably just sole operator to like, okay, I have a team and I have to make sure that everything is taken care of, as well as that I'm taking care of. And what's that
Sure.
leadership like?
I think first and foremost, this sounds very human resources, but always treating everyone around you with respect, and listening to people. I think every single person, whether they're, an entry level first year analyst or, the president of a company, has insight and knowledge into something. Real estate is a team sport.
Mhm.
There's no such
100%.
thing as you sitting at a desk and running Argus models all day long.
Mhm.
At any given point during a day, I spend at least half of my day on the phone or speaking to someone.
Right.
And so it is completely interactive. If I'm walking into any given situation where there is someone junior to me and not listening, then I'm not doing my job,
Mm.
because they're ultimately my model holders. They may have perspective, with, playing with certain numbers or something internally, that we're discussing that's exclusive to my organization that I don't necessarily have because I'm doing more on the field interaction that
Mhm.
specific moment in time.
Right.
So I think just respect and listening and transparency is really, really important. Listen, at the end of the day, nothing beats hard work.
Right.
Like I still, for what I do, and especially now within the world of private equity, I don't have a backup. And so your
Right.
work ethic has to be key.
Right.
And I expect that of everyone that works with me,
Right.
and on the same team as me. And so, if I'm on vacation, whether people want to hear this or not, yes, I log in because my
Right.
world doesn't stop
Mhm.
because I've decided to take a break. And
Right.
so a work ethic to me is very important. That doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy life. You should, but
Right.
understand that if you want to succeed, I think particularly within the world of institutional real estate, whether it's acquisitions or in my field, asset management, you have to be willing to put in the time and the
Right.
effort.
Right.
So,
And how do you, when you're interviewing someone
mhm.
to join Terry's team, how do you assess that talent? How do you differentiate between, okay, we need this person, right? Like, what is that secret sauce? People ask me all the time, like, how do I differentiate myself in interviews? There's a lot of great talent out there. People are nervous to
Right.
be in some interviews. What is something that you see, well, when you look at talent and surveying talent to join your team?
I really appreciate people who just ask. I'd rather you ask me more questions and not some generic question that you get from a website that says, well, what do you consider to be your strengths and weaknesses, right?
Right. Right.
You have to show me a genuine interest. I've received countless, um, requests, whether it be, like social media or through LinkedIn, that reaches out and say, they reach out and they say, I'm very interested. And you can tell it's a very boilerplate,
Mhm.
reach, just reaching out, which I'm fine with, but once we start engaging, I can tell that if there's just a lack of research and
Right.
just a lack of interest on your part, then there's no reason for me to continue to engage
Right.
at that point.
Right.
So I would say first and foremost, if you're really interested in doing this, um, have a specific set of questions that you want to know, whether it be from me or about this company or about my role, and I will engage.
Right.
But the whole boilerplate template
Right.
just doesn't,
Just vanilla.
it just
Right.
doesn't
Yeah. You
work.
judge a person by their questions, not their
Exactly.
answers. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's, you have to do your homework.
Exactly.
You have to do your
Agreed.
research,
Very much so.
so that you could. It comes from the intellectual curiosity.
Mhm.
It comes from, you've scanned the world that you humanly can so far,
Sure.
but it's not enough.
Exactly.
So now I need to talk to Terry
Exactly.
because she has what I don't have.
Exactly.
That's the experience. That's the
Exactly.
know-how. Yeah.
But I would say number one, first and foremost, when we're talking to people to potentially fill a position. Like if I feel and see, like I said, that you're proactive and that
Hmm.
you want to be there, I think that makes a huge difference. Real estate, particularly when you're starting out, can be very formulaic, right? I want to make
Hmm.
sure that you know how to use Argus. I don't expect you to run a lease or to know how to look at a CapEx plan and figure out, what to defer here and what to do here, or even run a complicated financial model. But I need you to be able to do fundamentals, and we can teach that
Right.
as long as you have the qualitative aspects, like I
Hmm.
said, of just being proactive and willing to put in the time. And I need to see that interest.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That makes sense. Switching gears here
Mhm.
to DEI,
Sure.
which has been a controversial topic
Right.
nowadays. When I started my career much later on, and I was when I was in acquisitions,
Right.
rarely saw anyone that looked like me.
Right.
So I can only imagine what that must have looked like back when you started in commercial real estate.
Right.
What was it like being and growing to be a successful Black woman in commercial real estate? And how was that like coming through your career?
Sure. So I actually started my career in 2005,
Okay.
that's postgraduate school with what I still consider to be an amazing company back then. I think at the time they were really at the forefront of making sure that they were seeing diversity and integration. But you are correct. Overall, I think real estate as an industry, in most industries, if not all industries,
Yeah.
we all have a long way to go.
Hmm.
In the time that I've been in my postgraduate career, I've seen some great improvements,
Hmm.
but I still think we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
Um, I can, as a Black woman, I'm super conscious of what I bring to the table, how I have to hold myself, how I have to compose myself. I'm conscious of the fact that people might not necessarily always be comfortable around me because they don't see me in their boardroom. So I have
Hmm.
to let my experience and my education really come through as much as possible.
Right.
Um, I, I'm, I'm bullish but not aggressive, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
I make sure to involve myself in initiatives, and the companies that I've always worked for are very open to making sure that there are other people that look like me that can come into the organization. My organization right now is like this. My former organizations were like that. And I'm proud to have been affiliated with the companies that I am right now because of those efforts. Like I said, we have a long way to go, but we're seeing vast improvements in terms of recruiting out of undergraduate and graduate programs. You're seeing a lot more targeting towards minorities, particularly African Americans within
Hmm.
real estate programs, particularly at great schools, HBCUs, some of our top schools.
Right.
I think we're making the right strides in terms of translating those individuals into C-suiters. We
Yes.
still have some ways to go.
Yes.
But I don't think that's just real estate. I think that's just the world in general.
There's been a lot of talk with DEI recently.
Hmm.
Um, it's become very political.
Sure.
A lot of companies are, I guess, setting back the agenda,
Hmm.
or maybe they want to use responsible. They don't want to may not want to use the term DEI.
Hmm.
It's funny. I say that George Floyd gave corporate America motivation for DEI instead of discipline
Right.
for DEI. There was this big rush. I'd never seen anything like it in terms of the attitude that
Right.
was there
Right.
to really have an importance for DEI. I think it was a shining moment for corporate America.
Hmm.
But I believe it was just motivation, right? It's almost like, you go to the gym and like, hey, we're going to work out and it's January 1st and
Hmm.
then March 1st comes by and I'm kind of tired of this.
Hmm.
As Black people,
Hmm.
or even everyone that's diverse in corporate seats, do we have an unfair burden to push these initiatives forward to where it might go against our standing in organization? Because sometimes I hear executives say like, I want to make this push, but if I make this push alone, I'm on an island and I don't want to threaten my standing
Hmm.
within a company. Is that fair to us, or is that something that we have to do? Is that something that we can't should we stand up and say, hey,
Mhm.
we can't let this die down? What are your thoughts on that?
So, uh, just as a overall quip, life is unfair, right?
True.
Um, but I think we have a duty and an obligation, not to ourselves, but just to generations after us,
Mhm.
to make sure that people have as much accessibility and opportunities. The world is not the same ultimately. We don't live in some massive homogenous world where we have the same groupthink exercise that we're all going through.
Right.
We're all different. And I like it that way.
Right.
I hopefully for those that don't, that's their issue. But
Mhm.
I personally like having a diverse background
Yeah.
and having diversity in this world. And it's not just about race, it's about ethnicity, it's
Right.
about, sexual orientation, all of the above. At the end of the day, being a responsible real estate company and investor ultimately means that you have to deal with DEI issues. Um, you know, when at least from a private equity and an institutional real estate, that your investor base is
Mhm.
diverse,
Yeah.
right? So whether you're DRA Advisors or one of my former companies, which is now Nuveen,
Mhm.
your investors that are actually giving money care about these issues.
Yeah.
And whether it's politicized or not, they want to make sure that those DEI initiatives are being met within where they're putting their money.
Mhm.
And if we are investing in retail assets or multifamily, and there are no people of color on a team, or no women, or no LGBTQ communities, how do you best decide what goods and services are going into a given community
Mhm.
in order to best support that community, and most importantly, maximize your profitability?
Right.
And so, whether or not people think it's important, it's important.
Yeah.
I know at my company it's important.
Right.
I know at a lot of other companies it's important. For those organizations that have just where it's gone away, well, they weren't doing the right thing to begin with.
Right. Right.
DEI ultimately is here to stay,
Right. Right.
right?
I I love to
I
think so.
take a personal interest in it because I need to ensure that my daughter and my daughter's peers and her friends
Mhm.
have more opportunities than I did. And
Right.
that's just the responsibility that all of us have. So is
Yeah.
it problematic for me to get involved in, making sure that one of our interns or a few of our interns are, are part of a DEI, which I hate saying, but
Right.
it's a separate story.
Right.
Absolutely, it's a responsibility because that same candidate who might be a rock star may not have known about my company. And if he
Right.
hadn't connected or she hadn't connected with me, and felt comfortable enough to say, you know what, I can succeed here too,
Right.
then they would have never had that
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. That's part of the reason why I wanted to have this show.
Mhm.
I just feel as though, to your point, there are a lot of folks in the community that don't even know these roles exist.
Absolutely.
Don't even know the different career paths,
Mhm.
or how it could, what and how, just how it could provide financially
Absolutely.
for families, how it could open up your mind. So, but Terry, thank you so much
Thank you.
for being on the show.
This is great.
You've given us a lot of wisdom, and we'll see you next time on the investment committee.
Thank you.
No problem.